This meeting is being recorded.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this webinar to introduce our new AOECS standard on gluten-free food products. We are very happy to count with such a big audience. And I'm also delighted to count with three wonderful speakers that will help us to understand the changes of this standard that for sure I think you will appreciate. We count today with the presence of Susanna Newhold, Emily Hampton, and Ana Campos. Susanna Newhold is the National Food Area Manager at the Italian Celiac Society. Emily Hampton is the head of food policy at Celiac UK. And Ana Campos is also working at the Spanish Federation of Celiac Associations, as well as for the AOECS as a license manager. A warm welcome from my side to the three of you. Thank you for having accepted the invitation to present this new standard. Maybe a few house rules that I would like to share with you. Please make sure that you mute yourself, and also if you want, you keep the camera off because during the webinar, because we will be recording it and sharing it with our stakeholders. So maybe if you are not interested in showing your face, you prefer to keep your camera off. Also, we would like to have like a first 20 minutes presentation. You can, through that time, write your questions on the Q&A chat, or maybe at the end of the presentation, raise your hand with a specific icon that you can see in the Zoom bar, and we will take care of your questions at the end of the presentation. And yes, as I said, by joining this webinar, you agreed that we will be recording. We just started recording this webinar, as we will be sharing it with our internal members, as well as with different stakeholders, particularly license holders or other interested parties in this topic. I hope you can hear me well. I see that there are some comments in the chat saying that you couldn't hear me, but it seems to be a specific problem for one person only. Yeah. And okay, without further delay, what could I do before I give the floor to my these important speakers? What I could do, what I could say about this new standard is that is the result of a great and combined and collaborative effort between a different level of expertise that we have in our internal technical working group, also in collaboration with other members of the celiac societies that provided information on ways to improve the standard. And last but not least, external or stakeholders that for whatever reason were interested in improving the standard, or because they had the opportunity to be confronted with the version that currently is in the market and wanted to provide us their practical feedback. We received suggestions, for example, from certification bodies or auditors that will have been conducting audits with the AOECS standard version 2.0. also from private companies like specific license holders that will guide us in this revision of the standard. The major objective of revising, well, for most of you that are familiar with certification standards or revision standard, you know that it is common practice to have a revision cycle that allows the standard owner to cope with the changes in the industry, and that is not an exception for us. So we wanted to also use the opportunity of a cycle to have a new version. But mostly, if you wish, we wanted to facilitate the understanding and implementation of the AOECS standard for those that were using it, mainly the food business operators that could receive an audit, as well as the auditors that will be conducting the audit. And concretely, we try to clarify and ensure that we will use through the document a consistent terminology to avoid confusion, to avoid redundancy, to keep clarity. We also try to offer you a more user-friendly document, both in terms of the layout, but also in terms of the structure. So you will see how we have incorporated as part of the document elements that were before considered as annexed. And then, of course, we wanted to offer you a more a content that will be meaningful and that will be clear, and again that will avoid potential confusion and if between clauses. So I think particularly for those that were part of this revision process and that were working hard to make it happen, they will agree that there are not big changes. There are small changes, but nevertheless, we think that can be that will have a big and positive impact for those using it. And if we wanted to cluster the changes into different blocks of changes, we could think that we have incorporated, let's say, editorial or wording changes in terms of the terminology, to fine-tune the terminology that we will be using in the standard. We will have changes in the structure of the document, so say the structure as well as the layout, and also changes in the content. So I say no significant, no major changes, but probably changes that hopefully you will appreciate as a user. And so without further delay on giving you a little bit of a landscape of the changes, I would like now to give the floor to Susanna so that she can walk us through the changes that she finds more relevant. Susanna, the floor is yours.
I think that now is the turn of Emily and then mine.
Yes, that's correct. So we switch around. I'll go first. So Susanna will follow shortly after me. So I will run through some of the changes in wording and the terminology that we've changed in the standard. As Veronica said, we've based the presentation of changes in wording, then some changes in structure and some of the content as well. So starting with some of the changes in the wording. Next slide, please, Veronica. Perfect. So as with all updates to any standards, we've just made sure that we've reviewed any terminology that's being used throughout the standard. So any updates that we've made are aligned with the Codex standard and standards that are used globally. We have made a change to using the word symbol. So we've replaced where we talk about the cross-grain trademark, In the previous version of the standard, we referred to it as the symbol. It's been replaced by the terminology cross-grain trademark. The reason we've done that is to just make it clear that the cross-grain trademark is registered trademark propriety of AOECS, because we know there are other trademarks available to be used. So we just wanted to make it very clear that this is a registered trademark by the AOECS. We've also updated the terminology around ingredients to make it clearer for those using the standard. So we've made it really clear what types of ingredients and what falls under the category, the scope of ingredients, and what that falls under. So you will now see that we've made it clear that ingredients includes raw materials, flavorings, food additives, and food enzymes, as well as processing aids. So hopefully that will help anyone using the standard, interpreting the standard, that all of those types of ingredients fall under the scope of the standard. So you'll see that in clause 3 of the new version, clause 7.3. Perfect. Some other updates to terminology to make sure that we are in line with standards. So cross-contact has replaced the word cross-contamination. So that's in line with what codecs have defined cross-contact as. So as you can see, it's more appropriate to use the terminology cross-contact when you're talking about an allergen, whereas contamination is more referring to that spoilage with microorganisms rather than allergens. So wherever we previously used the word cross-contamination, we've updated that with cross-contact. So that's just making sure we are in line and up to date with the correct terminology. So just some changes in the structure to the standard. When you see the new standard, you'll see at the beginning there's been an added liability and copyright clause has been added. I'll just wait until that person goes on mute so you can all hear me. Perfect. So yeah, we've added a liability and copyright clause at the beginning. Sorry. Could we all make sure we're on mute so that everyone can hear? I don't want anyone to miss out. Perfect, I'll carry on. The preamble at the beginning of the standard has been replaced with an introduction. So it very clearly describes the scope of the standard and also clarifies that the AOECS standard is a private standard that is owned by AOECS. We've made some changes to the annexes, as Veronica said at the beginning. So instead of the guidance to non-conformances being an annex, we've actually moved that into a section of the actual standard. So rather than that being a sort of guidance, it forms part of the main standard, which we felt was really important because having that guidance to non-conformances should fall within the sort of main chunk of the standard. We've also done the same for the HACCP guidance. So that's the table that you're probably familiar with, that rather than that being in an annex, that's also moved to section 10. And we've also reviewed technical definitions. So rather than that being an annex 4, the working group that both Susanna, Anna and myself sit in, we've been putting together technical definitions. So that's now going to be moved to the AOECS definitions paper. That's not quite ready for final release. It's currently under final revision and hopefully will be ready very, very soon. And all of those technical definitions have been reviewed and fit in with all of the documentation that's used across the European licensing system. So hopefully all of that will help clarify any terminology, any wording that's used so that you can refer to those definitions as and when needed. And I will hand over to Susanna, who will run you through some content changes.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you all to joining this webinar. We hope to present you all the most important changes that we have made to our standard. And as Veronica and Emily has explained, we just try to make more clear many parts, many issues of these documents that many stakeholders expressed to us the need to more clarification. So these are the big changes of the document. I start from the introduction when, we have the definition of gluten-free foods that comply with the Codex Standard for special dietary use for persons intolerant to gluten. We decided to refer also to the essential composition and the requested analytical method for gluten determination, that they should also comply with the Codex Standard. Of course, it was the same also with the current version, but in this way, this is more clear that we always refer, and this is our gold standard, the Codex Standard for gluten-free foods. So we always refer and comply with it. So this is very important to remind and to have it in the introduction. Next slide, please. Okay, as regard labeling, advertising, and presentation, this is section 5 of our standard, and there are two little clarifications. These are no changes, but clarifications. One is about oats, because you know that when a food product can obtain the license for the cross-grain trademark, using oats as an ingredient, should use an ELS code where the word oats is added in at the first part of the code. And in the current version of the standard, this word oats, it was not clear if you have to put it in English or in the national language. We had a long debate on this issue, and we decided to use the word oats in English. But it is possible that you can add also the national translation. So you can put also the national word for oats in your national language. This is up to national celiac societies to decide. For example, we in Italy decided to use just the word oats, but it is very clear because we do a big information of our members. Of course, oats should be listed in the ingredient list, as it is still considered an allergen. But of course, in some cases, it is also possible to add also the national translation of the word oats. What to do if you have just the word oats in your national language and not in English? This is not a problem, because there will be a sufficient time, a proper time for you to change your label. So don't worry if you can have this issue. This is about oats. And I don't know if you know, but it is interesting to let you know that also Italy has decided to license oats containing foods. Also in Italy, we were, I think, the last one that we didn't license this kind of products, and we just started. So this is another step in the harmonization of our standard, and this is something that is always going on, even and always greater harmonization of our standard Europe-wide, but I would say also worldwide. And this is a very good thing, I think. Another specification, clarification is that we say, okay, you can use the wording, suitable for celiacs or specifically formulated for celiacs, that are claims that are permitted and indicated by the European Union regulation. But of course, we specify that they can be used if permitted by national legislation, because of course, this ELS system covers not only European Union, but also many other countries. And we hope it will cover many other more. And so we have to clarify this, because in some countries, these claims are not permitted or could be different. So in this case, you have, of course, to comply with your national legislation. Even if I think that at the moment we have not, this is not the case, but if it would be, we have a standard that can fit also this situation. So this is another clarification and easy for user indication. Next slide. Okay. This is another changes, and this is, I think, very useful for you, because you know that for a rapid in-house control, you can have on raw materials, or for example, it is very used for checking surfaces if they have been well cleaned. Usually companies use this quick test. You of course know them, and in the current version we requested that this lateral flow test, this quick test, were based on the R5 antibody. We delete this, so you can use also test kits that are made that are based on other antibodies. So this is something that can be more useful for you, that you can use also other test kits. This was validated by the problem working group, with which the technical AOECS working group discussed this issue. So it is something that we that is scientifically based and was approved and validated by the problem working group. What is important to remember is that for the official analytical test, you have only to use the R5 ELISA based test. So this is the official method for the official certificates of gluten determination on final product. But this is possible for the rapid in-house control. So this is something that can be that can render more easy for you the production and the control of your production. Next slide. The last changes we made is in section 7. Section 7 is the technical requirements for food production, and we noted that we have in section 7.4 we have some specific indication on how to check raw materials that we call ingredients now in the new version of the standard, and how to handle the controls on high risk raw materials and low risk raw materials, and how it is presented, it seems that you cannot use ingredients that come from barley, for example, barley malt that we use for the production of gluten-free beers. So we decided to add this section 7.3.3 that specifies that it is possible, of course, to use also gluten-containing cereals, like, for example, barley, for example, or oats, under the provision that specific controls are, of course, taken out based on the risk assessment, of course. So this is a specification in order to be clear that you can use these ingredients, but of course you have to be very careful when using them and have a more focused, a great control on them, because of course they are gluten containing ingredients. And last, yes, we added this other requirement. You know that if a non-conformity is detected when the licensed product is already on the market, you know that the company has to notify to the relevant national association that this non-conformity. We have added that also the relevant certification body shall also be informed. This is something that makes the stronger our system, our alert system. Of course, we have an alert system as all the certification of food products, and in this way, all the actors that are involved in the process are aware of if something is going wrong and can intervene. Lastly, Next slide. Yes, we made also a clarification about the analytical controls, because in the current version we stated that the laboratory should be very familiar with the testing of gluten. We now have specified that the analysis shall be made by an accredited and independent laboratory which has obtained ISO 17025 accreditation from the competent national authority. This was something that indeed was already made by national societies, by companies, but was not so clear in the document. So now we have clarified that this should be mandatory. In the same way, we added this new clause 8.3, that explain that if you have an internal lab where you do your analytical testing, this is okay, but the lab should be trained in using the R5 ELISA method and work in accordance with the requirements of the ISO 17025. Moreover, the food business operator will, as a part of its own risk management procedure, compare its results with those of an independent accredited laboratory to cross-check and verify the results on a regular basis. So you can use your internal lab, of course, if it works according to the ISO 17025. Please unmute the phone. I hear a phone. Thank you. Hello, I hear you. And okay, you can do it, but you have to have a ring test, regular ring test every year to be sure that your results are okay, are cross-checked with an accredited independent laboratory. Okay, this is something that you already done. Many companies already done, many national societies already asked it to their companies, but we have clarified also this aspect, this issue. Okay, next slide. And finally, we had some clarification to the minimum criteria on HACCP for management of gluten-free production. You know, this is a list of all the requirements we ask to food producers about the technical procedure, the technical production of the products. And in we have made just some clarifications. Some point was not so clear, so we just added this. You will see that there are no changes. I should say that the only the only change important, significant, is that we call now minimum criteria and no more guidance, because guidance seems like something that you have to, you can follow, but it's not mandatory. In this case, using the term criteria, we say these are the requirements you have to comply with. So this is the most, I think, the most significant change, but the requirements are the same as the current standard. So these were the most important one. You will see then the standard, and you will see the specification, and of course for any question we are here, and also after you will read it, and if you will have more questions, we will always be here to answer you. Thank you.
So what's next? As you may know, the AOECS standard is being used in many countries alongside the AOECS territory. So the AOECS standard new version is in this moment is being translated into several national languages. So this will allow you to understand properly all the new content of the standard, and your national celiac society will give the updated documents very soon and available to have all the information ready for you to get adapted to it. As you may know, in 2021, 2 documents were launched by the AOECS. One of them is the AOECS gluten-free addendum that can be used alongside GFSI benchmark standard. And in the other hand, we have the AOECS position paper that can be used when a company is being audited against the gluten-free certification program from BRCGS. So as you may imagine, those documents will be adapted into the new standard content. The change will be minor, but they have to mention properly the new version of the AOECS standard. So we are working into that. Finally, we would like to share with you what is our timeline. The most important part for us to share with you is that the new version will be mandatory since January 2023. So this new version has to be used mandatory, like I said before, from this timeline, but we are working on a soft launch that will allow national celiac societies or companies to get adapted to this new version soon if they are interested in, but we have to follow a few steps to get ready. So we would like you to be calm that we have plenty of time to get adapted to it. So we are working on a training on AOECS audit too, that dates are to be confirmed and to be detailed. And this is all the information that we would like to share with you, that we are very glad to be prepared to share this new version with you. We have been working very hard on it, and we hope it fits with all your demands that we have been receiving during this last year. So if any of you have at this moment any question that would like to share with us, we are here, and afterwards we have our website where you can find us and request any information that you will necessary have for implement currently the AOECS standard.
Thank you very much, Ana. Thank you very much, Susanna. Thank you very much, Emily. I think you did great also in respecting the time. And now we would like to give the floor to the audience. I know that maybe it was a lot of information to take, I'm not sure. But as Ana repeatedly said, we are more than happy to take now any questions that you may have about this new standard. As you have seen in the timeline, we have different milestones that we are taking into consideration, and eventually to make sure that everybody will be ready to start auditing against this new version by January next year. So don't hesitate to write down your question on the chat or raise your hand and I give you the floor if that is easier for you. I think I have a question. Okay, there is a technical question here about the lateral flow tests, if they are acceptable or not. I don't know if Susanna or Emily or Ana would like to take this question now, or we can refer them.
Yeah, I can answer the lateral flow test question. Already in the current standard, we give the possibility to use these quick tests that are very useful to check. For example, they are used usually to check if the cleaning procedures have worked well, and so they are qualitative tests. They say yes or no. They are not quantitative ones, so they usually are used check the cleaning procedures. And in the current standard, you can use only quick test based on the R5 antibody. Now you can use also quick test based on other antibodies. For example, I'm thinking to the G12. I don't know if Emily, I would like to add anything else.
And maybe just to clarify that they're just for internal uses for cleaning down, and that for final product testing, it's still very important that you use the R5 ELISA, not a lateral flow test. So they can be used, but more for internal use. And it was just clarifying that you can use a lateral flow test based on a different antibody to the R5, because there is evidence to say that that is acceptable, but not for final product testing. That must be done with the R5 ELISA.
Thank you, Emily. There is another question that maybe I can pick up very quickly, asking what in one of the slides there was mentioning to AOECS paper. I think we were referring to AOECS position paper, which is the document we have issued to make sure that the certification standard for gluten-free and created by BRCGS includes the elements that are equivalent to AOECS standard. There is another question, and if it's not that, please, Andrea, you can elaborate on the question, but I think it's referring to that, right? There is a question asking us, very good question about the packing stocks. Of course, many companies will have stocks with maybe not using oats in English. And the question is whether we will allow a delay to be longer than 1st of January. I think the answer is yes. Would you like to add something more from your side, Emily, Ana, or Susanna?
Other than what you just said, Veronica, that yes, if they have additional stock, then they can use that up, and then just the next round would need to be the correct way.
Exactly. There is another question concerning, also very good question. In Spain, there are two associations, and despite of the core elements, there are differences in the documents they require to the different certification bodies. So the question is whether we aim at having a harmonized protocol, which actually is, it can be seen here in the timeline that we are working now internally in developing audit checklist or audit protocol, but there might be still differences in different national cellular societies. I don't know if Ana here, would you like to say something else, or?
Yeah, I would like to answer, Teresa, that we are working into that. We know that here in Spain we have different protocols. They are mainly the same, but some documentation different from the Celia Society that requested. We are trying to harmonize it among all Celia societies that are members from the AOECS, but we will talk with you and try to find the best way to have an harmonized protocol here in Spain, like you are requesting, but some difference will remain because the way of working can differ a little bit, but all the main content will be mostly the same. So do not worry at all for that.
Excellent, thank you, Ana. There is also a question here about whether we are going to allow the new version to be available before the January 23. I guess it's for preparation purpose. So as we will keep using the same the same model that we have today, which is people can ask us through our AOECS website if they want to get access to the AOECS standard in English. Of course, they can also contact the national celiac societies for the local language translation. But for the time being, we cannot say it exactly the day by which we will start making the new standard available. Certainly will be before the 1st of January, because we understand that you need to have read it and get prepared. But we are trying to combine that with the training on the AOECS audits. And since those dates haven't yet been defined, we will keep on hold until we have conducted those trainings. So I'm sorry that I cannot be more precise on the date by which the new standard will be available for upon request, but we are trying to take it with the training. But please, we will visit our website, because we will keep informing you about the next steps and walk you through the different milestones until 1st of January. There is another question. We produce gluten-free products, both with grain-free logo EU and grain-free logo US. Will BRC GFCP audits in future be sufficient for both logos? And is there an option to receive AOECS audits instead of BRC GS audits for both EU and US logo? So there are a few questions there. One is, but maybe I can also give the floor to Emily for the global audits. For what it concerns AOECS, yes, there is an option to receive AOECS audits instead of GFCP audits. So we always give the possibility to have AOECS audits, standalone audits against the standard, or in combination, let's say, with GFSI standards, benchmark standard, for which you will use the AOECS addendum, or you can use the GFCP audits, assuming, provided that the AOECS position paper is also part of that audit scope. And for the future, those are discussions that we need to have with BRCGS. So I guess it's a little bit early for me to give you an answer on that second question, Sandra. I don't know if, thank you, someone else, some of our speakers would like to add something, or?
Only when having the GFCP audit alongside the AOECS position paper, it would be expected that you're utilising the cross-grain trademark, not the other trademarks. That's the sort of the way we are working with the GFCP, that we have allowed it, but only alongside the position paper, but only for when the cross-grain trademark's being used, not another logo. And there's sort of a difference sort of within Europe and outside of Europe. But if you're using that position paper, we would expect you, if you're wanting to use the position paper and the AOECS side of the audit, we would want you to use the cross-grain trademark, not the other logos. But I think there's a few questions within that question that would need unpicking a bit further. That's quite complex.
But a very good remark indeed, that our standard, and that is for our cross-grain trademark that you can see on the bottom left of our presentation. There is another question from Roberto Dominguez regarding internal tests, the new 8.3. These internal tests made by the supplier could be used for their clients as valid tests for the raw material. Susanna or Emily, you can probably pick up this better than myself.
If I'm interpreting correctly, that's where if the manufacturer has their own internal test facility, and yes, they could be used to validate the test of raw materials, not a problem. Just making sure that you're regularly checking that with an independent lab, as Susanna mentioned, doing the ring testing to make sure that you're comparing those results. So yes, those internal labs could be used to check suppliers for their raw materials.
Yeah, I confirm what Emily said. Yes, the requirement is that the laboratory is doing regularly these ring tests, and it of course works in accordance with the ISO 17025 standard.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. Are there any other questions that maybe I have not seen to the chat? There is a, okay, the reaction from Roberto is, in this case, how as a client can know if these internal tests comply with the new standard?
You have to qualify your supplier. When you qualify your supplier, you verify which kind of controls they made, he or she made, they make on the ingredients they supply to you. So you ask for all the evidences you need to be sure that they use a internal lab that is has the requirement we request for it. So you should ask evidences that it works in that way, and that he is doing this regular ring test. So you should collect evidences, and this could be done when you do the qualification of your suppliers.
It seems like the internal tests are raising more questions. There is another one about what there is a way of validation of the method. I think you mentioned ISO, but let's say so that the results to be valid, by for the clients, or a specific way to express the results in a way to be acceptable by the client.
Are we talking about end product testing or ingredient? Is the client the buyer of the product? Who's the end client?
Good question. Let's see if Maria Dimani can elaborate a bit. Is for the final product?
So it's fine to use internal labs as long as they're using the R5 ELISA to test that final product. And as Susanna was explaining, it's just important that that internal laboratory is getting their method validated. So they would have to comply with the ISO standard. So that internal laboratory would have to be accredited to the ISO standard. So that's something they would need to do, get that certification. And then just to make sure that they are doing everything correctly, because it's internal and not going to an external lab, it would be important for them to do that ring testing to get that validation that the way they are performing the R5 ELISA is correct. So it's no problem doing the internal test and having that R5 ELISA. It's just making sure that their process is being validated regularly because it's not going to an external lab. So hopefully that makes more sense.
Yeah, I see that reads this comment. Working according to 17025 standard will be difficult to verify by GFSI auditors, as this is not our area of knowledge. We can just verify that the verify results against an accredited lab. So I was just thinking we can produce some guidelines. We are working on guidelines, and we can add some specifications more on how the auditors can check this specific issue. We will issue also a specific checklist for auditors, so we can help you on giving you some guidelines on how to check this specific provision. And I do thank you for having raised this thing, because I understand it is not so easy to check when it is so technical. I don't know, Emily, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree, Susanna. We can definitely provide some guidance. Normally, the lab will be provided with a certificate to show that they comply with a set of standards. So the auditor just needs to check that they've got the correct certification to the correct standards, and they should be able to show you that certification quite easily.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a matter of verifying again, but just relying on the certificate that they are accredited laboratory. There is another question from Andrea. CVs will need to prepare themselves before the mandatory date of 1st of January. It was just mentioned, we are not sure when the new standard becomes available. What can we tell them? So what you need to tell them is to stay tuned for the training because we are developing now the training material for auditors and also for licensed managers in the different national CELIA societies and other staff interested in learning and earning knowledge about how AOECS audits work. Once this training material is available, we will provide it to the national CELIA society so they can decide if they run it themselves or if they want to invite their stakeholders to the training. And as I said, the date is to be defined. We are aiming at July, but it's a little bit early for me to mention the precise date. And once this training, we announce these trainings, then we will make the new standard available for CVs as well. I hope that's okay. I'm glad to see that there is a lot of more questions. One is from Roberto again. As Teresa said, in Spain there are two associations. One allows the BRCG certificate plus module 12 as equivalent, the other doesn't. Any change regarding this point? Yes, there is a change, which is that the module 12 is not longer valid since I think April last year. Yeah. So that's not equivalent to AOECS because, well, it doesn't not longer exist. And it won't be in the future for the new standard. Now there is another question from Teresa as well, but the requirement is not that the internal lab is accredited, but working according to. This is not the same. Well, I think this kind of discussions are great, but the idea of today was to present you the new standard with the major changes. If we go far more into the technical aspects, I think those questions are more for a training where we can first train you, provide you the specific understanding of each of the clauses, and then we can have that discussion if you agree, Teresa.
Yeah, I agree with you. We can just explain better in guidelines and in the training this specific issue. And it's useful that you raise this issue because so we know that we have to focus more on it. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay. We have 3 more minutes to go. So if there are any burning questions, we can still address them to our wonderful speakers today.
Can I just clarify something on the testing that I just realized is important to add? So whilst the internal lab, and we've talked about the verification of using an internal lab, at least once a year and provided to the celiac society that's providing the license, the analysis will need to be done by an independent lab once a year. But outside of that once a year, you can use an internal lab. Just important to clarify that you will need to, that the food manufacturer will need to send it away to an external independent lab once a year.
Good clarification. Thank you so much. Well, I see that our list of 80 participants is slowly but surely dropping down into 60. So I guess it's because we are about to end this webinar to present the AOECS newest standard. But before we leave, I would really like to ask you for a warm applause, even if it's a virtual applause, for Emily, Ana, and Susanna. Thank you so much for presenting us the new standard. And we will be providing you more information on the next steps. So please stay tuned, visit our website, LinkedIn, and we will be delighted to provide you further information as it comes. Also, we have recorded this webinar. We will share it with the attendees and with the different national Celia societies afterwards.
And thank you, Veronica, for your presentation and great work in this revision.
Thank you very much. So, all right. Wish you all a wonderful rest of the day, and looking forward to see this new standard up and running.
Thank you, Veronica.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Jetzt kannst du mal sagen. Bye-bye.
Recording.